Welcome to the Joy of Cruising podcast with your host, award-winning author Paul C. Thornton, a weekly conversation with the amazing cruisers featured in the Joy of Cruising books comprised of The Joy of Cruising, Cruising Interrupted, new release, The Joy of Cruising Again, as well as other fun, informative global cruise personalities. It is the next best thing to cruising, hearing about cruising from the unique and diverse perspectives of Paul's amazing guests. If you hear about a cruise that interests you, book it at www.thejoyofcruising.net. It helps support the channel through our partnership with Where's Walters Travel. We really appreciate your feedback, so leave us a text. Paul can't reply, but he may read your text on air.
Hello, passionate cruisers. This is Paul, and I am delighted to welcome this week on the Joy of Cruising podcast, Niamh McAnally, a multifaceted cruise personality that quite frankly would have made a fine guest just to talk about one aspect of her impressive background. We could focus on her status as a best-selling author for Flares Up, a story bigger than the Atlantic, which was conceived in Antigua when she witnessed Paul Hopkins and Pugh cross the finish line after rowing 3,000 miles across the Atlantic, and the September release of her memoir, Following Sunshine, a voyage around the mind, around the world, around the heart, with a cover inscription by Liam Neeson that says, "Truly brave, enriching memoir that will take you on a global adventure." Or we could talk about the adventure that inspired many of her stories about travels on land and at sea, including her memoir. In 2016, she helped a solo sailor crew his boat from Florida to the Bahamas. It was only supposed to last a month. Niamh soon realized she had not only found the life she loved, but also the love of her life. She and Captain Gary have sailed as far north as Maine in the USA and to Bonaire off the northern coast of South America. With toes in the sand in Antigua, captain and crew became husband and wife. Finally, we could focus on Niamh's ongoing experience as a guest speaker on one of the top cruise lines, Celebrity Cruises. Niamh McAnally, aka The Writer on the Water, is an Irish-born best-selling author, keynote, and corporate speaker, former TV director, and youngest daughter of the late BAFTA award-winning actor Ray McAnally and actor Ronnie Masterson. Niamh has traveled all over the world and lived and worked as a volunteer in many island nations in the Caribbean and the South Pacific. Welcome, Niamh, to the Joy of Cruising podcast.
Thank you, Paul. So lovely to be with you.
So good to meet you virtually. How you doing?
I'm doing fantastic today. How about you guys?
Just hanging in there. We just got back last night. We went on a little mini vacation to New Orleans. So I'm digging out.
Good for you.
It was hot down there, but it's pretty hot here. I live in North Carolina, in the Charlotte area.
Yeah, it's been a warm summer.
So now, where are you at?
I'm actually
Niamh?
down in Punta Gorda, Florida, on the southwest coast of Florida.
Oh, Punta Gorda, Florida. We can have a long conversation. I used to work in Punta Gorda.
No way. That's amazing.
Actually, I used to work, I was headquartered in Fort Myers, and I worked for Florida Gulf Coast University. And we had, my area had a office in Punta Gorda. So I would go up to Punta Gorda, maybe once every couple of weeks. So
Yeah, it's a lovely, lovely town. It's still quite hidden, even though, a lot of people are moving to the area. It's we found it home because of being on the water and on a canal system. It just suits us perfectly.
yeah, I suspect we know some folks in common, but this is about you, so let's move on. Before we discuss your fascinating career, Tell our listeners about yourself in general. Where you're from, where you live. Well, you just told us where you live. Family, professional background, anything you would like to share.
Sure. Well, I'm from Ireland, in case you haven't picked up on my accent yet. I was born in Dublin and I went to school and lived up until the age of 17, 18, lived in Ireland. And then I went off to school in Paris, France, for about a year or so and came back. And then I was living in Ireland up until around 1993. At that point, I was working in the theatre and television industries. My parents were both actors, and it was kind of like almost I fell into the footsteps and ended up becoming a television director. So I did that for many years. But then I have such a love of travel and particularly volunteer travel. I started out, I think, in 1993 and have been almost traveling ever since.
Well, I mentioned your parents briefly in the intro. That's very interesting. Say some more.
Well, they were both. My father was a stage actor originally, so was my mother. They actually met on stage, believe it or not. And I think about 4 years after that, they got married. And my dad played in quite a few different movies. And one of them, actually, I got to work on in a capacity as the stunt assistant, which was a movie.
Really?
Yeah, it was one of those movies. It was a movie called The Mission with Robert De Niro and Jeremy Irons and Liam Neeson and my dad, Ray McAnally. And at the time, I had finished working on a project at the National Theatre in London. I had been on an internship there as a trainee director, and I had nothing else lined up. And my dad said, "Hey, I've just been cast in this movie, and we're shooting it in South America. Do you want to come? And you can hang out with me. We can, work on lines and all that kind of stuff." And I said, "Yeah." Sure. And when I got there, the producers figured out that I had a background in, canoeing and kayaking and a little bit of adventure sports. So the movie is set in it's actually set in Argentina, near the Iguazu Falls. And anyway, so I ended up working on the movie that way. So
And your mom, I've heard of your mom.
yeah, my mom was in a movie called Angela's Ashes, which was an Irish movie. Quite a few years back now. She played the grandmother in that part. She was also in Malice Aforethought and Bloom, and a lot of her work was on stage as well.
I was going to ask you, I was going to say, hey, let me be nosy. How did Liam Neeson come to write your cover inscription on your upcoming memoir? Well, I suspect you just answered that. Did you meet him on the mission?
Yes, I met both him and Jeremy Irons, who have been very wonderful cheerleaders to me in my writing career. Jeremy wrote the foreword for my last book, Flares Up, a story big in the Atlantic, and Liam has written the cover quote for Following Sunshine. I had the pleasure of one of the things I had learned when I was on one of my trips in Canada was what we would call Canadian canoeing. They call canoeing. And because of my skill in that, I was able to help work on that part of the movie where we're working with dugout canoes. And I spent a little time with Liam teaching him what I knew, which wasn't even much more than what he knew at that point, to manage his scenes above the waterfalls. And that was kind of how we got to know each other then. And I reached out when it was time to finish this memoir and said, "Hey, would you like to have a read and comment on it?"
Well, most of us action movie fans, we love Liam because of his recent roles in the last several years. When I saw, a photo of the cover and Liam Neeson on the cover, I got excited. I couldn't wait to ask you.
That's the mystery.
So I rarely ask this of guests, Niamh, but you are, as I mentioned in my intro, so multifaceted and as I already said a couple of times, fascinating. Let me ask, where would you like to start?
Well, it's funny because, obviously your podcast is about the joy of cruising, and that is one of my biggest passions. I am absolutely driven by being by water, either on it, in it, or under it. when I was a child, about 6 or 7 years of age, my parents moved to a house that was just across the road from the water in Dublin, on Dublin Bay. And I used to look out my window and I would watch all these little sailboats in the afternoon, little tiny little sailboats going along. And later in my life, when I was in my 20s, I learned how to scuba dive and fell in love with being underwater, and then went on to become a scuba instructor, which actually brought me to Florida originally in the Florida Keys. I used to teach scuba in the Florida Keys. And so I've been passionate about being on or in or under the ocean ever since.
I'd like to hear more about your adventure starting in 2016 as crew to a solo sailor, which culminated in a love story and marriage. I mean, that little bit, that sounds like a movie script, not a script, but a movie concept.
Yeah, absolutely. And funnily enough, that is actually the last third of the memoir coming out, called Following Sunshine. And you'll come across that love story there. How it came about, I had been working on the tiny island of Sark in the UK Channel Islands. It was an island 3.5 miles long, a mile and a half wide. And I was working in the hospitality industry at that point, and managing one of the hotels. And they closed for a year at the end of 2014. So I decided at that point that I wanted to do some more traveling. And a lot of times, a lot of my traveling has been around volunteering. So I took out a year and I volunteered in one direction across the world, mostly in the South Pacific and back around to the UK area. And I thought, okay, time to settle down. And I was addicted to this website where I was finding all these volunteer opportunities. And I came across this one that was to help a solo sailor, as you said, to crew his boat from Florida to the Bahamas for 1 month. And, back to my childhood and looking out the window at all those pretty sailboats, suddenly I was on a sailboat. I was crewing for this guy called Gary Krieger. And I was in the Bahamas in the most beautiful azure waters you can imagine. And I really fell in love with the lifestyle. And because we had no internet or Wi-Fi or cell service on the boat, we had nothing to do apart from working on the boat. As you can imagine, there's a lot of work, but we had nothing else to do in the evenings except talk to each other. So we got to know each other really, really well. And they were very profound conversations. And we realized, while we both grew up very differently, me growing up in Ireland and him growing up in America, in Los Angeles, we had an awful lot of things in common that we really, really appreciated and valued in life. And as the months went on, we sailed all the way down through the Bahamas. And finally, I think it was, we actually said goodbye to each other after 4 months, because it was time for him to bring the boat back to America. And I was heading to Ireland for a family reunion. And at the last minute, he decided he would come with me. I had invited him to come. And we then came back from that experience and sailed all the way up to Maine, back down through the Bahamas and into the Caribbean again. And I believe it was about 4 years later, in 2019, on the deck of our boat, Freed Spirit, he proposed. So that's how that happened. And we ended up getting married with what I would call a toes in the sand wedding in Antigua, because it was right before everything shut down, and it was time to, we were supposed to have a wedding in Ireland that year, which was 2020. And of course, everything shut down, and the wedding had to get cancelled.
What an awesome story. Are you listening, Hollywood? So you mentioned your introduction to the water as a young child. Let's talk a little bit about cruising in the traditional sense, mainstream cruising. When and on what ship was your first traditional cruise?
Right. Well, at one of my careers, I had been working in sales in insurance and retirement financials, and I had done quite well with it. And I won a cruise, for your sales numbers, etc. And I had won a cruise up in Alaska. And honestly, I cannot remember, because I wasn't paying too much attention, because I didn't, book it or anything else. I cannot remember the name of the cruise line, but it was one we went up to Juneau on the Inside Passage, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, like I said, I was living on the sailboat with Gary. There was just the two of us. And after we brought the boat back to America, finally after 6 years, we lived on it for 6 years. We talked about where else in the world do you want to go and what do you want to do? And he really wanted to go to Italy, and I wanted to show him a lot of different places in Italy because I'd been around. And we came up with the idea of going on a cruise. And we had this thing where we went, I wonder how we're really going to like this, because we've been able to go to these exotic destinations where you can only go by private little yacht. And now we're going to be on a boat with like 2,000 of our new best friends. And we thought, are we going to like this? So we booked this cruise on Celebrity. It was Celebrity Constellation, and it was all around Italy and then into Montenegro and Croatia. And you know what we decided? Mindset is everything. So before we got on the boat, we said, no matter what, we are going to love this. This is our vacation. We are going to love it. Whether we love it or not, we are going to love it, right? And do you know what? It was amazing. We got on, we went, wow, this is incredible. Number one, there's a different captain who has to worry about the weather. We don't have to worry about it. There's somebody else working the galley. I don't have to slave in the galley. There's somebody out on deck doing all this for. There's somebody washing my dishes. There's somebody else making my bed. This is amazing. And we're on the water and we don't have to work. It's incredible. We loved it.
You fell in love with it, or you loved it, even though you had already decided before you go, we're going to love this. You genuinely loved it.
Right. Yeah, no, we did. We said no matter what, we're going to love it. And yes, we did. We actually did.
How soon did you cruise again?
That was, believe it or not, what's this? Yeah, that was last July. July of 2023 was our first cruise together after we'd brought the sailboat back to America. And we, on the ship, while we were on the ship, we found out about the Beyond the Podium program that Celebrity runs, where they have guest speakers on, whether they are destination speakers going to tell you what's coming up at the next port, or whether, it's a naturalist, whether it's Alaska or, the Galapagos, explaining all the flora, the fauna, and the animal life. Or this third category, which is sort of authors, entertainers, celebrities, sports figures, etc. And believe it or not, Gary actually spoke to the cruise director on the ship we were on in Italy. And he said, my wife's an author and she does talks. Would you like her to give a talk on one of her books? And he said, yes. So we did this kind of ad hoc talk on that actual vacation, on that first cruise that we did. It was a little small event in the library. It wasn't on stage. It was in the library, but he had it up in the community board. So we had quite a few people come, and we did a lot of talk. We talked with people about it then. And when we came back to land after that cruise, we auditioned and interviewed with the shore department for the entertainment, for the speaker thing. And the next one they put us on was last December of 23, which was a Caribbean cruise out of Fort Lauderdale, which did a lot of the islands we'd been to before, obviously. And two we had never been to because it was too difficult to get out to was Barbados and where's the other one I'm trying to think of? It'll come back to me. It was one other island we hadn't actually been to.
That's great. That's great. So when you do your talks, do you tell them the story about the very romantic story? I mean, that is such a great story about, meeting Gary and getting back. Do you go through the whole thing?
We do actually. One of our talks is called Finding Meaning Through Traveling. And we start off with a map of the world and with a little star in Ireland and a little star in Los Angeles, and say, how come these two people of such different backgrounds who grew up 5,000 miles apart, how come we're standing together on this stage today? And we show how I traveled as a volunteer and the different places Gary. So this little star moves all around the world. And then when do we actually connect us? When we go onto the sailboat. And we do tell that story. And the other funny part of that story is my family turned around to me and said, hang on, you don't know this person. You're going to go to sea with somebody you've never met, and you don't know an awful lot about sailing yourself. How do you know this guy is not an axe murderer and is going to throw you overboard, right? And what I didn't know at the time was he had friends in the marina he was in, and they were saying to him, hang on a second, you're going to take this person on board with you that you've never met her before. How do you know she's not a modern day pirate who's going to steal your boat?
So So you both were kind of hearing the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. And so we tell that story, and then we've another talk we do on the cruise ships, which is what is it really like to live on a sailboat 24/7 in a 40-foot space where there's nowhere to run, there's nowhere to hide. You can't go up to deck 10 and to the buffet,
Right, right.
if things go wrong. So we do a talk on that. And I think what people are loving on the cruise ships when we give our talks is the fact that we're both there together. We kind of banter off each other as well. It's a lot of fun. People come up and say it's an awful lot of fun.
That is great. So give us just a little taste. What is it like living on a sailboat where you can't go up to deck 10 to the buffet?
Well, I'll give you an example. There was one day we had a problem docking, and it was very let's put it this way. When you dock a boat, and I'm sure every cruise captain will tell you this as well, it's almost like there's nobody around. If you dock perfectly, there's nobody around. If you have a bad time docking and it's bumpy and you're running into things, it's like the whole pier is full of people looking at you going, no, you're doing it wrong or whatever. So we had one of those experiences docking, and we had this difference of opinion. I had said to him beforehand, I said, we were going in for fuel. He said, I think we should go in for fuel. And I said, do we really need fuel? We had plenty at that point, I thought. And he said, well, we should always top up. And anyway, it went horribly wrong. I mean, we really nearly damaged ourselves, our boat, and like two other boats in the marina because the wind caught us, and
Oh, wow.
the guys on the deck were supposed to hold our lines and walk the boat backwards so we could pull out, into the wind, and they threw the lines on it was a cluster. Okay. And so anyway, so I got a little upset because I was out on deck trying to fend off from all these expensive boats, and anchors were flying one way and everything. And so anyway, after it was over, I stormed off. I was so mad, right? Because I told you we shouldn't have gone in there. And he said to me, no, you didn't. You actually asked me if we really needed fuel. And in that moment, we realized a couple of things is that just because we both speak English doesn't mean we both speak the same language. Right? And I hadn't actually said, I was talking in a roundabout way. I didn't actually say, hey, I don't want to go dock right now because I'm a little concerned with the wind and everything else. Anyway, so I'm all mad, as only I could be, storm off, get as far as the bow, which is like, what, 20 feet, away from the cockpit? And I thought, well, now what? Where am I going to go? There's nowhere to go. I'm in the middle of the ocean. Where am I going to go? And so I literally had to turn around and walk back and say, we are living in this small space. We have to fix this. We have to talk this out. We have to come back to terms and, calm everybody down. So that's one of the things we learned. And the interesting thing is the more acquainted we became and the more we understood each other, it was almost as if the boat got larger. You know what I mean? We kind of moved around each other almost like an orchestra. Whereas in the beginning, like, excuse me, and felt crowded. It felt to me afterwards when we really connected, the boat became bigger.
This was well before you had, how do I say this, a romantic interest, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
We were just captain and crew at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And Gary had come out of a long-term land-based career and also a long-term marriage. I had been single for a number of years, about 6 or 7 years at the time. Neither of us were looking for a relationship. And a matter of fact, I've got a line in the book Following Sunshine where it says, one thing I learned about Gary early on, he was allergic to pecans and relationships. So he was definitely not looking for any romantic involvement whatsoever. But, it was back to that bond connection we had, and it just grew from there. It was something bigger than we expected. And after the 4 months, we split up, and he said, I'm going back to America. I'm going back to see my family. And I was going off to Ireland, and we said goodbye. And do you know what, Paul? It was one of the most interesting things. For the first time in my life, said, I'm sad to let this person go out of my life because I knew he was super special. But at the same time, I can tell you that just having had these last 4 months sailing together has made me a better me. He has been that powerful an influence on my life. And when we did reconnect, and he eventually got over his allergy to the relationships, he's clearly still allergic to pecans. But he kind of went, I appreciate your patience with me. I just needed to figure out what I wanted in life, and we wanted. It wasn't that we wanted necessarily to be together. It was almost we just had to be. And together. This is why we're doing so much of our work together on the cruise ships, is because A, we're meant to be together, and B, what we're showing people is we're not spring chickens, and you can reinvent yourself. You can create the life you want. Gary learned to sail when he was 68, and he decided to buy a boat.
Wow.
Right? I know. And when he was 72, he got certified for the first time as a scuba diver. So and now he's on stage with me on the cruise ships. So it just shows you, stick with your passion, go for what you want, and then just take those baby steps to get there.
Now, did you influence him to get certified as a scuba diver?
Well, that's a funny story. Originally, when I applied to be his crew on the sailboat, he had about 20 people apply for the position. And he picked me because he'd seen in my resume I was a scuba instructor, right? But by the time I'd gone on the boat, I had stopped teaching scuba professionally, and he wanted me to teach him. And I said, no, I'm not like licensed to teach you anymore. It's been too long since I taught, and I don't have insurance to teach you. And number two, they say husband and wives shouldn't teach each other how to drive a car. So I really thought, right? Yeah, that's fraught with all sorts of problems. So I really didn't want to teach him. And so he was mad at me at first. He was like, that's the reason I picked you to be my crew, because I thought you could teach me. so anyway, so it was, I don't know, it was about 2 or 3 years into it. We were actually down in Grenada. I want to say it was the summer of 17, 18. I can't remember exactly. And we got into diving there. And so I said, well, here's a wonderful instructor. He's going to teach you. But I came on all his dives with him as well, So that was wonderful.
The last thing about being a cruise ship lecturer, when is your next, engagement on Celebrity?
Well, we're really looking forward to it. It's coming up in November. The next one we're on is November 7th out of Barcelona. And it is on the Constellation, which will be lovely because it'll be our first time back on the Constellation since. And it's the repositioning. It's Barcelona to Tampa, Florida, via, I want to say Valencia, Cadiz, and Lisbon. And then it's a straight run from Lisbon to Tampa. And they've asked us to stay on a back-to-back, and then the next one is Tampa to Honduras, 2 ports in Mexico. I want to say one of them is Cozumel, and then back. So we basically be on the Constellation for almost the month of November, which we're really looking forward to.
Okay, the reason I asked, and I really lit up when you said in November, because I am booked on a Celebrity cruise in November. But it's on their newest ship, Celebrity Ascent.
Oh, lovely, lovely. I haven't been on it yet. I believe it's gorgeous.
Yeah. I was on its sister ship, the Celebrity Beyond. In fact, that's my favorite ship. And I suspect that it's going to get surpassed by Ascent, because Ascent should have everything Beyond has, and maybe a few new things. So we'll see. But
nice. I've been following. Is it Captain Kate on the Beyond, where she does all her little Instagram posts? Yeah, lovely. It's fun.
Yeah, I had on the CEO of Celebrity at the time that Beyond, that class of ships was introduced. I've had her on the show, so I proudly, I get involved in a lot of Facebook groups, including celebrity groups, and I like to point out My favorite ship is Celebrity Beyond, and that also happens to be the favorite ship of the former CEO of Celebrity. So
Oh, lovely.
you're also known as the writer on the water. So let's talk about the writer on the water. Talk about the backstory of Flares Up, a story bigger than the Atlantic, which I have not read, but the synopsis looks really, really interesting.
It was a passion of mine. The Writer on the Water as my brand evolved when I was on writing on the sailboat. When I first got on the sailboat, Gary had read one of my short stories. I've written all my life, but had read one of my short stories, and he said, "Only if you have got to do this full time." And so I would do that. So I actually started out. There's plenty of pictures of me out there, like in the cockpit with my little laptop typing away. When we were in Antigua on the 20th of February 2020, we were actually giving a talk on land to a group of people who wanted to become sailors, like what we were doing, and what was it really like to live on a sailboat, what they needed. So we were giving a talk, and we were sitting in the cockpit, having a late lunch. And I say a late lunch because Gary likes to get up at the crack of noon if he can in any way do it, right? So we were sitting there, and the next thing we heard people say, "They're coming." And we said, "Who's coming?" And they said, two of the guys are about to row ashore in the Talisker Whiskey Atlantic Challenge. And I had seen these rowboats. There was an old one in Nelson's Dockyard there in Antigua, and I had seen it, and there was a picture of somebody had rowed across the Atlantic. And I couldn't believe we were going to meet somebody that had actually done it. I mean, our longest passage had been out in the Atlantic. It was 10 days on the sailboat, and it was ugly. We had horrible weather, and it was not something I wanted to repeat. And I couldn't imagine these people are in a 20-foot rowboat. We were in a 40-foot sailboat. They were in a 20-foot rowboat. So anyway, we dropped everything. We jumped in our dinghy. We motored out to the edge of the harbor where they were expected to come in. And if anybody's been in English Harbour or down around Nelson's Dockyard, when I know you dock in Antigua, you dock in St. John's usually, but you can take a trip down to Nelson's Dockyard. There's a green and red marker buoy at the channel markers. And when they cross that line, the cannon goes off and everything erupts. And this is the finish line. They've literally rowed from the Canary Islands across. And what happens then is they ask them to light their handheld flares as kind of their Olympic podium moment, if you like. And Gary was driving the dinghy. I had my camera, my stills camera, and I was taking shots after shot. And there was just this moment when the two men held their hand flares up, and I took this photograph that was just one of those, talk about a Hollywood moment. I mean, I could hear Chariots of Fire going on in my head. It was just so emotional. And we went ashore as soon as they came back ashore, and then we were there for their ceremony, if you like, of like, welcome to Antigua. And after the ceremony was over, they were served their first, shop meal, if you like, off the boat. And they were sitting there by themselves. And it turned out they had no family on island to greet them. So Gary and I went over and chatted with them. And we showed them the photographs. And the one guy who was the firefighter, who had originally suffered a brain bleed at age, I want to say 52, recovered from it and decided he was going to do something that was going to challenge himself. So he was 55 years of age, having recovered from the brain hemorrhage, and decided he was going to row across the Atlantic. Now he had never rowed a boat in his life before. He thought that was a great idea.
Oh my goodness.
And then I know, right? And then he needed to get somebody to row with him because his wife said, "You're not doing this by yourself," rightly so. And so that's where Phil comes in. He was 65 and he had always done these kind of adventurous sports in honor of his disabled son, like to try and keep himself fit and healthy. And he would do these sports. So the two of them got it together. So Gary and I said, okay, we were fascinated with their story. And we invited them onto our sailboat for their first home cooked meal for the following night. And we started asking them all about it. And I said to them, they found out I was a writer. And I said, be very interested in your story, but not about how to row across the Atlantic, but why you did it, how it affected your families. And when you've had a chance to really reflect on it for yourself, how did it affect you as a human being? How did it change you? I said, that's the story I would want to write. And it took me a year with them on Zoom calls and telephone calls and emails, etc., to try and, piece it all together. And what I did then was I wrote it. It's all true, but I wrote it to read like a novel. So it's not very dry. Do you know what I mean? People get into it. And it's not all about the 70 days they were at sea. It's all their backstory, their wives, their families, their children, as to why they did it and how it affected them. So it's something I'm very passionate about.
Wow. I don't want to overuse this, but I already said your story that started in 2016 ought to be a movie. Flares Up ought to be a movie too.
Well, you're right. And again, from your lips to Hollywood's ears, I am working at the moment. As soon as the next book comes out, I'm actually trying to start on writing a screenplay for Flares Up, because I do believe it's very visual story. It's very impactful, and whether it turns into be like a 90-minute movie, or whether I write it as maybe a short limited series for something like Netflix or Hulu or Apple or something like that. I think their story is really worth telling. And again, back to my original point, it is never too late. And one of my reasons for writing that book, Flares Up, is to inspire all of us to achieve any goal we set ourselves. It doesn't matter how small the goal is, and to push past any obstacles we face. And that way we really can feel like we're living a meaningful life.
Great. Well, I wish you the best of luck in making that come to fruition. Give us a preview of your upcoming memoir, Following Sunshine, a voyage around the mind, around the world, around the heart.
Thank you. Yes, this one I'm very excited about. This is actually my story, which then morphs into my story with Gary on the sailboat. So the section about around the mind is really what I grew up with in the variety, if you like, with my parents being actors. They were freelance actors, so they never knew when the next job was coming. They might get cast for 3 or 4 weeks at a time. And then they would, find the next job, if you like. And for me, that gave me a liberty as a mentally growing up, is that I didn't have to like pick one road and stick with it forever. If it wasn't working, or if it was something more passionate for me, I could change and reinvent myself, which I ended up doing. I think this is actually, writing is my 5th career, if you like. So the first part is all about that, growing up in Ireland and dipping my toes into volunteer travel. The first one was in Belize. In my scuba diving background, it was to work on coral reef protection and they were setting up a marine sanctuary in Belize at the time. And then I went on working with dolphins and turtles and mostly marine based projects that I was doing. And then, like I said, that middle part, a voyage around the world, is my year where I started out in London and I said, okay, I'm going to circumnavigate. Now, not by boat, it was going to be by plane. And I'm going to do all these different projects around. So I started out in, I want to say, St. Bart's in the Caribbean, helping island diving, a gentleman there by the name of Birdie, who is, if everybody's, docking in St. Martin, for instance, St. Bart's is just a ferry ride away, 1-hour ferry ride away. But they did lovely diving there as well. And then working my way through the South Pacific, New Zealand, Vanuatu, Fiji, and Kingdom of Tonga. I spent about 4 or 5 months in the Kingdom of Tonga, which was absolutely stunning. I was volunteering for a family who had a swim with the whale business. They had photographers they would bring out to swim with the humpback whales when they came up from Antarctica to birth their calves. And then around up to Palau, and then through Asia, and then back to London. And as I said, that was supposed to be it. I was supposed to, okay, good girl, settle down now. That was wonderful. Get on with your life, kind of thing. And then, like I said, I said, oh, I'm so excited about all these projects. I looked and I found that final one to help Gary sail his boat for 1 month, which turned, as you know, 1 month turned now into a lifetime. We're 8.5 years together, 4.5 years married now. It's amazing. So that's the voyage then around the heart is obviously the two of us kind of understanding and realizing that there was a very powerful relationship about to blossom.
Wow, that is going to be a powerful memoir.
Thank you.
How can listeners get their hands on the books? Of course, Flares Up is out already, and Following Sunshine will be out not too long after this episode airs.
Right. It's coming out on September 12th is the Following Sunshine is coming out then. So I think the best way for everybody is to direct them to my website, which is not my name because that's too difficult for everybody to spell. But my website is called thewriteronthewater.com. And on there, there's lots of gallery, lots of photographs of our life on the boat as well, and from cruising, but also all of my links to all my various Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn and YouTube. All those links are there as well. But so it's thewriteronthewater.com.
Good. So let's shift gears and talk about your time not on the water, which sounds like there's very little time not spent on the water. But what do you do in your me time?
Well, me time at the moment is actually a lot of work because, between writing and I'm doing a lot on the campaign here now as the memoir comes out. But when we brought the boat back to America, we found Punta Gorda, we talked about at the beginning, and we found this house on a canal where we could bring the sailboat back to. Now, we since sold the sailboat, but we bought another, what I would call runabout for Charlotte Harbor area, day boating. So we do like to get back out on the water. And, some days I'll be working here in the office and then Gary goes, well, let's go for lunch. So we just bring our picnic lunch and go out on the water. It's just so soothing to be anywhere near it. And we're kind of like really working now with the community here, getting to know people. And it's lovely that we've made so many friends here. And, there's so much to do. Gary was a very beautiful potter and sculptor, which was one of his passions before he was on a boat. Obviously, he used to have a kiln at one of his houses. So he wasn't doing that on the sailboat, as you can imagine. So he got into that a little bit in terms of, back into the creative. But mostly between the travels and writing and working on various parts of the industry, if you like, in the publishing world, there's a lot more to do than the old days. People wrote a book and put their manuscript in the mail and then sent it off to the publisher, and then they went back and they wrote the next book. But there's much more involvement now from the authors.
Right. You have to promote. That's a part of the deal.
Yeah, from your books as well, is
Yes.
that it's you don't say the end and then, okay, let me go make dinner now. No, there's more work to be done.
That's right. Do you travel much for leisure anymore?
Well, trying to build that in with the cruising as well. We're kind of saying to ourselves, for the next couple of years, as we're doing all the cruises, that is our leisure time as well. The beauty of it is all of our talks are done on sea days. So, which is when people are on board. So we're actually free on the port days. So, if it's a port we haven't been to before, we'll definitely go out and explore. If it's a port that we have been to like many, many times in the Caribbean, for instance, we might take that day and stay on board and relax and read a book. Obviously one of the things a writer does is the other thing for their time is to read. And so I do a lot of reading of other authors and, share insights and learn from other people as well.
Well, Niamh, before we let you go, I'm going to shift gears a little bit. A couple of what I call light, even fun questions, and then what I call an oddball question, because it really has nothing to do with the water, nothing to do necessarily to do with the water or cruising. So the first question, what I normally say on the first question is, what are your favorite cruise drinks and cruise food? In your case, I'll say, what are your favorite drinks and food at sea? Because that might take on different iterations.
Well, here's one of the things. While we were on our sailboat, especially in the Bahamas, it was quite difficult in many of the smaller islands to get like salads and fresh vegetables like that. So we would try, because that's one thing Gary and I eat every day at lunchtime, or it's our go-to meal is a salad. So on the cruise ships, the array of choices of salads that you can make your own salad and everything, we love that. So that's why, like, for lunchtimes, we always go up to the buffet and make our own salads and stuff like that. And also in terms of on a sailboat, you've got a limited range. Literally, you've got, 2 to 3 gas burners that you can work with. So I ended up trying to do a lot of what I would call bowl dinners, like, mixed veg and a protein or something like that. We generally try and eat as healthy as we can, but I'll tell you what, my nemesis on celebrity cruises, I think one of the best desserts they have is tiramisu.
Oh,
And
yes.
we always, when we get on the boat, we always sort of say, okay, now we're going to behave this time. We're going to walk, and we're not going to take the elevator. We're going to walk all the way up to the buffet or to the restaurants, and we're going to walk from bow to stern, etc. And which we do. And it kind of, well, we won't have dessert. We're certainly not having a dessert every meal. But then I said, well, if there's a tiramisu, I'm having it. That's it, because they do a wonderful job.
Now, I suspect, well, I shouldn't assume. But, when I have on the show world travelers, and I've had many, I always ask them, just out of curiosity, have they tried any exotic local delicacies? And I've heard some. I have some for you. How about you?
Right.
Do you try any exotic dishes in those out of the way islands that you've been to?
Yes, I think, well, especially if you're living there. When I was volunteering and living there, you have no choice because that's what's available. So yeah, I've certainly had some interesting food. A lot we did was a restaurant near the marina in Grenada, where they did like a smorgasbord, if you like, of all sorts of different local delicacies. I don't remember what everything was, but they just give you a little taste. But yeah, I think one of the things in traveling is, in order for your mind to open, you really do want to try and get a feel for the culture and for the community and for the food and the way of life. Otherwise, what's the point in traveling?
Name something that you never thought you would try, either in at home in Ireland or in America, that you came to enjoy, or maybe not enjoy, but you did try it.
Yeah, I do remember one, and this was actually before the cruising, was actually in South America, and it was during the filming of the mission. This is my early memory of eating something that I wasn't used to eating. And we were in one of the villages up in the jungle near Santa Marta, and we had finished the day filming. They were kind of having a little bit of a party, and somebody said to me, how do you like the iguana? And I went, yeah, they're cool. I love them. They're amazing. No, the one you're eating. And and I, like, honest to God, it was one of those, oh my God, I thought it was chicken because it tasted like chicken, right? And there was another one up in, I went up to do a photography course in the north end of Sweden in Lapland for the Aurora Borealis. And I remember the first time I got there, I was starving. And the girl who greeted us at the airport said, oh, the sandwich is over there. So I'm eating. And she said to me, how are you enjoying the reindeer? And I said, I haven't seen any yet. And she goes, no, the one you're eating. So it's not so much that I've been very adventurous and I've gone out and go, okay, let me go eat a reindeer. No, it's like I've ended up eating things like didn't know what they were, So just like, okay, I'll try it. And the other interesting one was down in Tonga, and I think they have it in Fiji as well. It's the cassava, which I guess is their equivalent of a potato, but a much more fibrous kind of a potato. And depending on how you doctored it up, it tasted a little bit like potato, maybe.
No, that's something I've had. I've had that. Is that's a Jamaican
Is that where it
ackee and
originates?
cassava? Yeah. I've had that. Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Okay. Second question, and again, this can cover cruising or sailing. What's your most memorable, or funniest, or even most embarrassing cruise or port or sailing experience?
Ooh, that's a tough one. That's a tough one.
tough one only because you probably have dozens that you could pick one of many stories.
Yeah, everything's embarrassing. The one I think about and often, and again, this comes out in the memoir. It's actually not on the water. It was when I ended up in Vietnam, and somebody had said to me, "Oh, you should go to Hanoi because it's amazing. It's so it's the atmosphere in the old quarter, etc." And what I didn't realize was they were very much younger than I was, and so what was atmosphere to them was like super noisy. To me, it was like cars and horns and all that kind of like aural, assault on the senses. But I arrived late anyway into Hanoi, and I was hungry. And the lady said to me, "Go across the street. There's a little shop there." And I went in, and I couldn't see anything that I could make. I was like staying in a little hotel, kind of like a pension. And anyway, I saw these. It was two apples. I said, "Oh, that's great. I'll grab those." And I don't need a knife and fork. I don't need anything, right? Because I was backpacking it. And next thing, the lady who was in the shop, suddenly started screeching at me, and I didn't understand what she was saying at all. And then she grabbed the apples out of my hands that I was about to pay for, and she almost pierced me with her big long nails. And and then the next thing, I turned around, I saw she put the apples back on the tray where they had been in her shop. What I hadn't seen beforehand, there was a lit candle and a picture of this older couple, and I had desecrated an ancestral altar where they would, honor their ancestors.
Wow.
It wasn't food for sale at all, and there was flowers. I mean, I didn't put the whole thing together, and I went, "Oh man, I'm like what 20, not even 24 hours in the country, and I've already desecrated a home altar." So, in terms of embarrassing, that was up there with the most embarrassing one ever.
Wow. How would you have known though? But anyway, yeah,
But it's a funny thing. Like, one of the things I have shied away from is reading too many travel guides, where they say, "Okay, you're in Paris, you should go here, 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 here." And one of the reasons I've done that is if I'm going to be in a community for a period of time, I don't necessarily want to go around on travel tip overload from somebody else's experience. I want to go out there and, go with the community, and they'll be able to tell me where I should go, etc. And because I had kind of not read anything about where I was going, one of the things I learned from that experience is I do need to understand cultural norms before I arrive so that I can respect the cultural norms. I can't remember, is it in Thailand? Or maybe it's both countries, Thailand and Tonga, where if you have a bill, like a paper note, and it flies out of your hand and you run after it, you cannot put your foot on it to stop it blowing away, because that means you're standing on the king's head on the note.
Oh, okay.
That's a major cultural faux pas. So little things like that, I've learned that maybe I should learn a little bit more so I don't, embarrass myself or, end up in a jail somewhere.
Okay, the oddball question, and again, it's only oddball in that it's not directly related to the sea. I suspect, at least I hope, some of your social media following and readers and friends are listening. Welcome, Niamh's friends and fans. We certainly hope you have enjoyed listening to the Joy of Cruising podcast, and will come back to listen to additional episodes. Niamh, share one thing that my listeners and your friends and fans don't know about Niamh.
Oh, there's so many. One of the things that a lot of people don't know is I actually narrate my own audiobooks for the books that I write. From back in my not childhood, but my early working years, one of the TV programs I directed was the first program for the deaf people in Ireland. It was the first time it was ever put about, and I learned Irish Sign Language for that. But unfortunately, I don't remember a lot of it now. I think I can still spell my name. That's about it. And I learned from that experience, it was very interesting, is that somebody who was deaf in Ireland and somebody who was deaf in France might have more in common with each other, because of that perception of the world through sight and all the other senses, than they would necessarily have with somebody in their own country. what else do people don't know about me? Maybe some of the stuff they don't need to know. Maybe some of the stuff I don't need to know. Like, we put that behind us.
Well, Niamh, thank you so much for coming on the Joy of Cruising podcast. I'm looking forward to promoting your episode. You know, I have to be careful not to use too much hyperbole, but you are truly a fascinating person. I've already vowed not to use the word amazing, but I'm just going to say to my listeners, this is a story you've got to listen to, and you've just had, I believe, just a wondrous life, and I wish you all the best with your upcoming soon-to-be bestseller, and I wouldn't be shocked at all to see one of your books or stories on the big screen, or I say the big screen on Netflix, on whatever medium, but both the stories that we talked about, Flares Up and Following Sunshine, to me are worthy of more than the bestseller that you're about to write, or about to publish.
Well, thank you. I do appreciate your kind comments, and thank you so much. And hopefully, I will be getting my schedule for cruise talks that we'll be doing next year for the 2025. Should have that in the next month or two, and we will put that up on the website. So hopefully, Paul, someday we'll end up on the same ship. That will be fun.
There you go. In fact, the way I like to close, and you just kind of beat me to it. We will see you on the ocean.
There we go.
All right, Niamh. All the best, and take care.
Thank you, Paul. Lovely chatting with you.
The Joy of Cruising and Cruising Interrupted, each $16.99 plus shipping, and new release, The Joy of Cruising Again, for $18.99, can be ordered at the link on thejoyofcruisingpodcast.com. For each of the 3 books, use the discount code Joy of Cruising Podcast and get $4 off. The Joy of Cruising books are also available at Amazon. Order the ebook at Amazon or your favorite online retailer. Stay in touch by joining the Joy of Cruising Podcast Facebook group or following the Joy of Cruising Podcast on Instagram. We're constantly adding new shows. Please leave a review and tell a friend about us. We hope you enjoyed this brief escape to the ocean. See you next week.